they're a very special couple to me and Miss Carolyn. When we were first approved as missionaries, Brother Lee and Donna were in Crane, Texas, way out in West Texas. And Brother Lee, and the day, I believe it was the day we were approved there at mission camp, he said, I want you to come and be in our mission conference. And we scheduled it and went out there. And Brother Lee was our field representative and stayed in touch with us and prayed for us. And as we transitioned off the mission field, he transitioned from Crane up to Odessa. So we kind of lost touch there for a little while, but I thank the Lord for putting us back together. And I appreciate him being willing to come and preach for our homecoming today. So Brother Lee's going to come and he's going to take the next, I think in West Texas they don't have clocks or anything, so they just live off the sun. So he's going to take whatever time. It'll take you at least 30 minutes to get home and get ready for supper or lunch anyway. So you come, Brother Lee.
Well, this is a great day for this church, isn't it? 113 years. You know, most churches don't last that long. Churches are like people. They're born, they grow up, they have adolescent years, adult years, senior years, and they die. We don't like to think of it that way, but they do. None of the first churches in the first century are around. They've all gone somewhere. Those 7 churches of Asia, they're gone. And some do better than others. Some go longer than others. Some survive but don't, if you know what I mean. But this one has. Amen. And you won't, you know, we all have a lifespan, but God gave you a long one. And you're still ascending, and you still have vision, and there's still a lot of young people here, and just not every church can say that. A lot of churches after 100 years aren't much to them. But you guys are going. And it's encouraging. I've enjoyed myself here. Byron, I give you $2,500 for these acoustics. Man, you've got good acoustics. The church we planted in Houston they called this beaded box siding at the time. They used it in the railroad. And we had an architect pointed out to us, and he said, if you ever tear this building down, I'll buy this from you. And boy, it was good for acoustics. And we got better acoustics in Odessa than we had in Crane. Crane was designed in a way that I think they paid somebody to kill the sound. And it was rough. But this is nice. You guys sang well. It's a blessing. Your pastor, we met a little over 20 years ago. I was on the mission committee. I am in West Texas. If you've never been to West Texas, it's desert. We get, on the average, 9.5 inches of rain a year. And they tell us that doesn't sound like much unless you're there the day we get it. It is very dry, very windy, not pretty. There's a rugged beauty to the land, but the towns, if you think of Alaska, just kind of built to stay there. And so everybody, wherever they go, come back talking about how pretty things were, wherever they went, and I would. And somehow we had this guy from the woods, and this guy from the desert, West Texas desert, and we kind of connected. And in ministry, you don't choose who you connect with. I think it kind of chooses you. And we connected well. He came out for a mission conference. I don't know if you remember this, but one of our people died, and they were having the funeral in Mineral Wells, which is 4 hours away. And I didn't want to go by myself, and so I had missionaries can't say no. So I had him get up about 4:30 in the morning, and off we went, and we rode to that funeral and back, and that's where I got to know Byron and realized, y'all don't know my first name, I'm Linda. And but anyway, I realized that there was a lot of substance to this young man, and they were good missionaries, and he's been a good pastor here. You guys have a catch, and you treat him good. Take care of him. Do this. Somebody nod. Yeah. Okay. I would like to thank Ruby Nell for letting us sit in her seat. We didn't know when we sat down, and Donna asked. She didn't say anything, but said, Donna asked and said, I hope we're not in someone's seat. And she said, well, I usually sit there, but you're just fine. That's a good saying. Nobody made us move. I appreciate that. You already have my text this morning, I guess, Genesis 35. I get this call from your pastor here. Asked if I would preach this. I got to tell you, I was excited. I've been hearing of this church for a long time. And I was excited. I still am. And so I called him, what was it, last week. And I said, well, what are you looking for? And he said, oh, just an anniversary homecoming message. Now, that's pastor speak for I don't have a clue. That's why I'm having somebody in to preach. And I said, okay. And as of Wednesday, I didn't have a text. And I was beginning to panic. And we have an office prayer meeting every morning, Monday through Friday, and I was telling him, pray for me because there are no anniversary homecoming texts. And I'm not sure where I'm going to go. And I really think the Lord gave me this. It was, we're going to go with Jacob when he went back to Bethel. Sometimes texts are hard to find. You know, my mom's 93. She'll be 94 in April. Really good lady. A lot of fun. I was telling her about this. I said, Mom, I don't know what to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. I'm getting up on it. We just got a few days. I got nothing. And she said, well, I'll give you a suggestion. I said, what? And she said, you know, this has kind of been on my heart. It's been the prayer of my life for a long time. And, you know, maybe you could use it because I think it would speak. And so I asked her. She gave me the reference. I looked it up. Declined it. Well, I'll show it to you. It's in Matthew chapter 17. If you're there, Matthew 17, verse 15. Lord, have mercy on my son, for he's a lunatic. She didn't do that. Truthfully, I think this will apply to us. If you know the scene, Jacob is at a very low point in his life. He has had to run away from home, and he's a homebody. They had to run away from home because his older brother Esau is going to kill him. And if you read Esau's story, Esau's the kind of guy that could pull that off, and he would do it. And so Jacob is off. And now we're 25 years later, and he's out of Canaan, and he's at another low ebb. It's kind of a sordid story, but had a daughter named Dinah, apparently pretty naive. And she wanders over in the town, the next town, and these were city-states. So every town, instead of having a mayor, they had a king. And they were all an entity to themselves. And this is the king's boy named Shechem. And Shechem got an eye for her, and he raped her. And she went home, and the brothers found out about it. And Shechem decided he wanted her. He wanted her in his harem. And her brothers, now remember, Jacob had 2 wives and 2 concubines. This is wife number 2. Her brothers were deeply offended, of course. And if you follow the story, what they did is they worked a way out, and Simeon and Levi went into Shechem's town, and they put all the men to death. And Jacob said in chapter 34, I think verse 30 there, he said, "You've made me stink in the nostrils of the people around here." Life had been pretty good, and now it'd gone to bad. And he just knew that some morning they were going to wake up and be surrounded and be exterminated because everyone's angry. Here come these guys in. Who do they think they are? What do they think they're doing? And as chapter 35 opens up, God says, why don't you go back to Bethel? Build an altar there. Let's read this passage. First 7 verses. This is some interesting stuff. We won't have time to explore all of it. It says, God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel, dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. Notice that, first start. What made this place special? You stopped here when you were running from your brother. Now notice this. And Jacob said to his household and to all that were with him, put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean and change your garments. Now there's a whole sermon in these two. What were they doing with those gods?
Yes.
And let us arise and go to Bethel, and I'll make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of distress, and was with me in the way that I went. Those little gods never did that.
That's right.
All those little gods, let me tell you something about false gods. They always take more than they give. They always take. You carry them. You take care of them. A lot of people have false gods. I had a guy in my office here a while back who had a drug problem, an ongoing drug problem. And I finally told him, Robert, it has taken your dignity, you've lost your family, you've lost your career, your health is ruined. You need another God. This God is taking a lot more from you than he's given. Why don't you get the right God? And he kind of offended him. But gee. And so Jacob said, I want you to get rid of those little gods. Let's go to the God that answered me. And so they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their land, and he pounded them to dust and burned them. No, he didn't. And all their earrings, which were idolatrous symbols from their ears, Jacob hid them under the oak by Shechem so he could go get them later. Hello? But they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. They were hated, but somehow God kept them off of them. And so Jacob came to Luz, which is the land of Canaan, in the land of Canaan. That is Bethel. He and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, or the God of Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. You notice this text is bookended with why Bethel was special. Because he stopped there and God appeared to him. So it's a good thing. I love days like this. The only downside right now is you are just as aware as I am that I am all that stands between you and lunch. And so I know you're wanting. We can smell it too. But you just hang on. All right? I'm brief. I rarely go over an hour, 2 hours, and I'm done. I won't do that to you. Sometimes at homecomings, you see people you hadn't seen in years. And you don't even have to go to a funeral. You just see them. It's a happy time. Atmosphere's upbeat. Everyone's up. Music was upbeat. Thank you guys for the music. We're glad you young people are serving.
Amen.
We eat good food. Have good fellowship. Share good memories. Have the evening off. For all I know, they have some sports on TV back there. I don't know. Makes for a good day. It's kind of like attending one of Israel's feasts. You know, they had a bunch of them. What's not to like about a day like today? The truth is, we want to have a day like this every so often. I think you should. I mean, even when life is good, just every day of life can wear you down a little bit. Just every day of it. And life isn't always good, is it? I know preachers preach that it is, and I know we fall for that a little bit. It creeps in. The truth is, life's not always good. Bible people had a lot of trouble. Jesus said we would. John 16, didn't he? He said, in the world you'll have tribulation. Translate that. Trouble. You're going to have trouble. And so we shouldn't wonder about that. Why did this happen to me? Why me? Why now? Why this? Hey, welcome to life. It happens. But we fall for it, and I have it. You do too. Preacher hears it. You know, Pastor, we was going to do this, and I'm going to tell you, God was in it because it just went so smooth. Well, maybe God was in it and it didn't go smooth. Jesus told the apostles to get in a boat and go across the Sea of Galilee, but that didn't go smooth. And they were in the middle of God's will. Sometimes life is just tough. And things aren't good. And it's nice to have a little bit of pick-me-up. And so it's a tonic. It's a tonic to my soul. Gather and celebrate. One of the reasons Israel had feasts. God said every once in a while you need to get together, eat good, and enjoy each other's company. We need it as much as they did.
Amen.
So what we're doing today is absolutely appropriate.
Amen.
Good for churches to mark God's blessing. I think celebrating is, especially victory, it's a positive thing. We ought to celebrate maybe more than we do. It's easy to get fixated on other things. Fact is, sometimes we need to go back to Bethel. Bethel had positive connotations for Jacob. Bethel is where Jacob had his first meaningful encounter with God. Now, listen to me. Now, he's running from his brother Esau. He's leaving home. He grew up in a religious family. Maybe not on the par with what his dad grew up in. Isaac grew up under Abraham, and everywhere Abraham went, he built an altar. You just follow him. Everywhere when he stopped, he built an altar. Isaac, everywhere he went, he dug a well. He wasn't so big on the altars, but he dug those wells. Probably a little bit more sedate, practical just guy. So Jacob grew up, he knew about God. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think Jacob had ever given God much of a serious thought. You worship because your family did. And it was at Bethel that Jacob had what I call his crisis of faith. Now I know people probably use that for a different thing. But what I mean when I say that is, it was the day that Jacob decided he was going to follow God as a man. Not just, he was no longer at home. Listen, I did this. I grew up in a Christian home. We went to church every time church was church. Every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, often Tuesday night because they had church-wide visitation. We went, but nobody asked me. This was not, my parents were never those, do you want to go to church? Because I said no. But we went. And I know that's a philosophy today. Well, I don't want to cram church down his mouth. Yeah, like school. Do you ask them if they want to go to school? Because if my mom had asked me, I'd have said no. But you went to school. Like I have not grown up and I've refused to brush my teeth because I was made to as a kid. I learned. And so Mom and Dad said, you go to church. We go into church. And they took us. But I got out on my own. I had a job. I had a car. Rented a mobile home. And then I had to decide whether I was going to go or not because they couldn't make it. Crisis of faith. And for a while it didn't. God had to deal with me. And boy, I can remember because I grew up in church. And I can remember thinking, God's not going to let me keep doing this. So I was in rebellion. Any of you remember the old Foghorn Leghorn cartoons? How good were they? They had a scene on many of the cartoons, he would draw a line on the ground, and they had this dog. They were nemesis. And he would walk up to this doghouse, and just the dog's backside was hanging out of the doghouse. And he'd grab it by the tail, take a board, and paddle that dog. And then he'd turn and run, and that dog would be going, coming after him. And when he'd get to that line, the rope would run taut, and the dog would just go, boom, and fall. And I remember thinking, rope's going to go taut. God's going to let me go so far, and one day he's just yanked me parallel. And I remember going to bed at night, that little time before you go to bed, which for men's like a minute and a half. And I'm laying there thinking, and something bad would happen. I think, okay, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. And then it even out. And you know, finally that got me. And I straightened up. Crisis of faith. Well, this was Jacob's crisis of faith. He's running from his brother, probably looking over his shoulder constantly. He gets to Bethel. He lays his head on rock as a pillow. Rock is a pillow. And God reveals himself that night, and he gets up and says, oh, God is, he probably never said that. It was the place. When you said Bethel to Jacob, that was what came to his mind. And so when he hits this low ebb and he's outside of Canaan, God says, you go back to Bethel. Build you an altar there. He didn't have to explain himself. Jacob got up the next morning and said, get up, we're going to Bethel. And you remember he told him, he said, that's where I met God. I was running from my brother. It was a special place. Well, this can be a back to Bethel morning. Can be for you as a church. Your pastor and I have talked quite a bit, and during and after COVID has come up over and over and over. During and after COVID, during and after COVID. I don't know if you realize how hard COVID was on pastors. And still is. To begin with, we were going through something we weren't prepared for. I'm guessing you did it, but I had preached the days coming. We're going to have to decide who's going to stand against the persecution and come to church. But we weren't expecting to be put in a position where the Christian community said, if you meet, you don't care about people. And we had to stop meeting. Who would have thought they'd have put us in that position? And then we rocked our way through that thing, trying to get electronically online. I had preacher friends call and say, you don't do electronic giving. And trying to adjust and get things up and running and going. And then things eased up, and not everybody came back. And I don't know anybody who escaped that. Every pastor I know, their numbers aren't the same. And some of the people that didn't come back kind of surprised us. We figured they'd be back, but people found out, especially where we're at out there, they found out I can watch church in my living room in my underwear. And I kind of like that. Not only that, I can log in and leave, and they think I will. And we just had some people that didn't come back. And everyone you talk to, they'll say, well, before COVID we were running this, and after we're running this, and we're trying to figure out, where do we go from here, and what is our strategy, and how do we get back there? And finances were better, and we were going to do this, but now we're struggling a little bit, and we're working along. And he probably doesn't mention it from the pulpit, but let me tell you, it weighs on him, because you count anything that's valuable to you. You probably know how much money you got in your wallet. And he's counting these people, and some of them aren't there. And it bothers you. It does all of us. And we can go to a meeting and talk about it, but it doesn't make us feel any better. And as a church, you get a little discouraged. And when a pastor's feeling a little discouraged, it can't help it. It shows and you share. You don't want to. I mean, some guys do. They're whiners, but it may be good for the church to go back and say, wow, look at what God's done. 113 years. We're still going. Not behind on anything. Gonna eat well? Let me tell you, there are godly groups of people in good churches that won't enjoy a meal like you do today. That are in areas where the poverty is rough and they're struggling. God's good to you. You have a wonderful place to meet. It's cool in here. Wouldn't you like to meet the guy that invented air conditioning? Send him a Christmas card. It's good to celebrate. And then, as individuals, I wonder how many people here this morning just maybe need this very thing. Maybe you've gotten involved in some sin and it is strangling you. You never thought you'd be there. I cannot tell you how many people sit across from me in the office and they're involved in whatever, an affair or whatever, and they say, Pastor, I never intended for this to happen. But it did. Sin always sucks the life out of you. And it's just been out of control. Maybe it's not sin. Maybe it's something else. You know, God talks about sin and iniquity. Iniquity is not necessarily sin. It becomes sin. But, you know, sin is like, don't do that. And you do it. Iniquity is you take something legitimate and you take it out of bounds. That's really what lust is. Lust is not necessarily sexual. It can be. But lust is a legitimate desire taken out of bounds. Taken too far. So, well, I learned a long time ago. I've been doing this a long time. I've learned when someone says, Pastor, we're buying a vacation home. What I hear is, we're not ever coming back. Because Sundays belong to the vacation home now. Well, nothing wrong with a vacation home. Unless it takes the place of your service to God, and then it becomes iniquity. Because you've taken it out of bounds. We're getting a boat. There's nothing wrong with a boat. Unless, weekends are the only days we got off. And you know what? We can worship the Lord from the lake, just like in the church. You cannot. Au contraire, mon frere. Do you know they say 55 one another commands to churches in the New Testament? Love one another, care for one another, be patient with one another. 55 of them. One another commands can only be obeyed in community.
That's right.
Can't obey them by yourself on the boat.
That's right.
So how are you going to do that? How are you going to do those one another commands? Hebrews 10:25. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. And it becomes sin. I used to play golf. I'd like to pick it back up, still got the stuff. I never was very good, but I enjoyed playing. I ride a motorcycle. Don and I ride motorcycles. Hogs, we ride hogs. And we travel. And there's nothing wrong with those motorcycles, but do you know what? On Sunday morning, I don't ride at church. And now I got guys that do. I don't ride it on Wednesday night. Every once in a while, Sunday night, we have Awanas on Sunday night. But I have made a conscious choice to keep that thing in its place because I don't want it to start riding me. Because I love riding it, and if I'm not careful, so we ride off to Colorado Sunday morning, we find a church, and we get in church. We don't take vacation from that. If you're me, I never have an idea. I'm not creative. I'm not innovative. If I do have an idea, I brag about it for 2 years. I'm so excited. But I'm always looking for them, and I recognize them. So often we're going to church, and we try to find something in our strategy to see how they're doing things. And we'll walk out and say, oh, and we do things that we saw. But that's the Lord's time. And we're trying not to let that thing become iniquity. But if something like that's done, and it can be softball. You can get so involved in softball that the tournament's on Sunday and you can't be in your place. And you know what? You hadn't really thought about it, but it strangled the life out of you. Your walk's not what it used to be. None of us set out to do that. But it happens. Maybe it's a trial. You know, if you're not in a trial, you probably just came out of one or you're getting ready to go into one. Always something going on. And it's hard on us. And it beats us down. That's where Jacob was. I mean, Jacob hadn't gone and killed anybody at Shechem. But his boys had. And now, all of a sudden, life went to pits. Maybe just with time to get cold and dull, going through the motions. Has anybody here ever been there? Things kind of dry. And you go because you're supposed to go, and you're involved because you're supposed to be, but it's not. You know, I don't think we have to explain what being moist spiritually compared to being dry spiritually is. And it's not what it used to be. I think Jacob looked over at Bethel and he thought, you know, this is not what Bethel was. I thought I was doing fine. Left the Holy Land, left Canaan, economy was good, money was good, life was good. And God was just kind of an afterthought. God said, you go back to Bethel, it's time for you to straighten that up. And to Jacob's credit, he did. It could be this church is your Bethel. Because this church has been here a long time. I suspect there are people in here, your whole spiritual history is right here. This is where your parents brought you when you were a baby. You were born again. Some of you could stand up and say, I was sitting right over there where that pew is when God spoke to me and I was born again. I met my husband or my wife here. My mom and dad. I was in Crane. That church was 85 or so years old, and we had second and third generation people. And there were people who their parents were met there and were born again there and married there, were baptized there, and then they were saved there, and they met or were married there. And I mean, it was their spiritual history. Amen. And I've talked to pastors before and said, well, I think we're going to have everybody sit in the middle. And I'd say, you got to understand, some of those people have been sitting there 40 years, and every time God spoke to them, it's been right there. And you're asking them to move? See, that's why I appreciate Ruby. Because this is where my spiritual history is. It's your Bethel. Got some young preachers in here. This is the place God called you. It's your Bethel. God maybe brought you here today. You need to build up an altar and worship. Maybe haven't in a long time. Back to the back. Homecoming. Anniversary. August 16th, I believe it was, 1966. I was at the Trenton Avenue Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas, which happened to be located on Trentman Street. I never got a good explanation for that. But it was a Sunday night. Growing up there at church, I'm nearly 10. I don't remember the sermon, but I do remember tugging on my mom and saying, I need to go, I need to be saved. So she took me up front, knelt with the pastor. He read to me from the Roman Road, though I didn't know that what it was at the time. Romans 3, 5 and 10, 6. And I trusted Christ that night. I remember how light and clean I felt. I remember that my parents stopped by Dairy Queen and we got an ice cream on the way home. And to this day, you can ask my wife, when these little kids are saved, I usually take them to their parents and I'll tell them, when I was saved, my parents took me out for ice cream. And they always give me the milk. But most of those kids get ice cream. And it makes a very positive connection with your pastor. But you know what, they sold that building and they moved, they changed the name. Every once in a while, when I'm in Fort Worth, I'll just go up the Mansfield Highway and turn on Trenton and drive by that building. I've taken my kids and I've said that's where I was born again. And if we could get in, I'd take you right where I was. I'd tell you where I was seated. And that's where I was when I surrendered to preach. Wasn't during a church service. God dealt with me outside the building, but that's where I went up on a Sunday night and told the people. And you would have had to know me. I looked out and people were looking at me like, right. Because we were in Fort Worth and the school was right there and a lot of kids went to the school, a lot of things were said, most didn't stay. And I was coming off of rebellion and my hair was still long. This was 1976. And I remember, I'm still trying to figure everything out, but I remember thinking, will you give me 6 months and see what you do? So that's where I went all the time I was in school. I got to preach my first sermon. This is my Bethel. Every once in a while, I just slip back there, and I was thinking, when I was preparing this, I need to someday just knock on that door and see if whoever's there will let me in and let me wander around. It's been a long time. Is this your Bethel? It's good every once in a while for you to take stock. So this is the place God used to deal with me. Where was I then and where am I? Have I grown and is my walk with you closer, Lord, or have I cooled down? Have I dried up? You don't have to stay that way. Now, we got a good cross section in here. I like this. Demographically, okay, ages especially. We got a good group of young people. Some of us are not so young, are we? You can do this. You know, John addresses that in his short letters, where he says, you know, you young people, you're important. And then he says, you older people, you're important. You've known Christ from the beginning. I don't know if you realize how important you are now that you're older. Don't back off. You know, we didn't even meet Abraham until he was an old man. His best years, really all we know about him is as an old man. Now, I've been praying that. I'm 66. I'm getting into that. I've been pastoring for 41 years. I'm type 1 diabetic. I have very good health, but we tend to complicate up. And I look at the Bible, and not many old men in the Bible ended well. A few did, but not many. Most of them fell apart. David didn't end all that well. Solomon sure didn't end well. Even Hezekiah and Asa and some of those kings that were good kings, they didn't end well. Somehow they fell apart. Even Elijah. Elijah got to the point that God said, go appoint Elisha. And we don't hear a whole lot more from Elijah after that. He just kind of, he didn't go down horribly, but Abraham ended well. And I keep praying, Lord, give me Abraham years. Let me end well. Because I know, and it's been pretty public lately, a lot of preachers have fallen. They've had great ministries, and they just kind of go off the rails. I don't want to be that guy. I know you don't want to be that guy. I want a guy old and full of years.
We've gathered at my If you are older, you finish well. Boy, when we got older saints in the church and the storm comes up, it's good to have somebody that can stand up and say, hey, I've been through this. All the young people are ducking under the pews. They say, I've been through these storms. Let me tell you, God will take care of us. You need those people. You younger people, you look to these older people that have been serving God for generations, for decades. Because they've done something a lot of people haven't done. They've stuck with it. So, well, they're out of touch. No, they're not. If anyone's out of touch, it's probably you. Listen to them. They have some wisdom you don't have. This church needs you guys. And I so admire you. Because you get to an age where what doesn't hurt doesn't work. And you get up in the morning feeling good, you're going, hey, because things hurt when you get up. How many of you guys like need a jumper cables to get up and we've laid still too long and we stove up and we get up and we get going and yet in they walk. We had a lady at Tabernacle named Elizabeth Hammond. Her and her husband were born again late in life, baptized. She had had some kind of pneumonia thing that turned into something else, and her lungs were about gone. And she carried one of those oxygen things. You've all heard of them. And Sunday morning, she'd come in. The way our building was built, there was one direction you'd come in with no steps whatsoever, but it's a little longer. She'd come in the back door, and then she'd sit in a chair for a little bit, and she'd finally get a little energy up, and then she'd go into the auditorium. And then I'd be preaching, and if I paused, I'd hear every so often in the service. And I'll be honest, I'm a little distracted. And right at first, I'd want to tell Elizabeth, would you turn that off? Go. But then one day, God just kind of said, that's the sound of faithfulness. Mm-hmm. You got people that didn't come this morning because they brushed their teeth and their gums hurt. And this woman had to take 2 trips to get in here. Sit there with that oxygen. You know, over time, that became abusive. She's gone. I preached her funeral, preached her husband's funeral. But I think sometimes just her coming in and letting me hear that machine probably did more for me than anybody else. And her husband, Larry, tell you what he did for me. As a pastor, you got people that are encouraging, but sometimes they're not honest. You know what I mean? It's the person that comes out and says, that was great, Pastor. Your pants could have fallen down. And they'd say, that was great, Pastor. And that wasn't appropriate. Anyway, Larry would come out every so often and he'd say, I don't know what you were trying to preach today, but thanks, Larry. But you know, when he did come out and said, boy, God spoke to me, I knew he was being honest. And I remember him for that. Well, those compliments meant something coming from Larry. They were old and infirm. But God used them. Oh, yeah. All right. Yes, I use notes and I don't try to hide them. I'm starting to move. You haven't caught on yet. How good would it be if you came this morning, it was Sunday morning and everybody was going to eat and you were looking for fellowship, but you left renewed. You got more than you think. Your fellowship with God was restored or just better. And you had the fire relit in your life. How good would that be? How
good could it be in a few years you could point back and say, there's my back? 2022, August was 27th. I was there on a Sunday morning and God met with me. I wonder who this morning would say, you know what, I'm back about it. Now it may be your first trip, or it may be your second. Both of them were big encounters for Jacob. But you're at Bethel. And I hope if you're that person, that you won't let it run past you. That you won't tell yourself, well, you know, I think I'll deal with this later. Because let me tell you something, you probably won't feel like that later. God's dealing with you now. Don't waste the opportunity. And if you are sensing something down in here, the Holy Spirit has a way of working. And that's God working. Think a little bit about what we believe. You know, when you talk to someone that doesn't know Christ and you say, let me tell you about someone. He was born, but he didn't have a father. Just a mother. He had a father, but not a human one. And he lived a perfect life. Never sinned, never an unkind word, never none of impure thought, never sullied himself. Absolutely perfect. And then he died. And when he died, he represented and actually physically on his body took all of the sin of mankind, past, present, and future. But now he didn't stay dead. Do you realize how ridiculous that story is? Why would anybody in the 21st century commit themselves to that? I'll tell you why. It's because when you're telling that story, the Holy Spirit is whispering in their ear. It's true.
Amen.
And you'll talk to people and it'll just be like strumming in harmony. They'll hear that and it'll ring true. Because the Holy Spirit's at work. Well, we dare not demean the Holy Spirit. Don't let anybody hijack him from us. We can't survive without him. And it may be this morning that something's going on there. Let me tell you, that's God speaking and loving you. And saying, it's true, you need to deal with this. And you're in a friendly crowd. You're among people that are for you. If you step forward and make a decision, nobody's going to go, well. They're going to go. So I want to invite you this morning. If God's dealing with you, and you've thought, you know what, that's me. I'm Jacob. I am so cold. I'm so dead. Or I am in rebellion and I didn't even know I was rebelling. And I have just turned my back, at least spiritually, and I hadn't even thought about it. And it's like God's yanked the rope. We serve a God of second chances. He's always willing to take us back. He's here today. Jesus Christ is here. And he's saying, just like he did back